Welcome to Mentor, a Siemens business presentation. This presentation will focus on automating design compliance testing and reducing certification risks. There are many things that PCB designers have to consider when making boards today. Some of the challenges are complex design requirements that feature signal integrity issues or power integrity issues or EMI, EMC things, and practices on the board, as well as safety regulations such as IEC standards, the various protocols that are common technologies on boards today, like PCI Express and SerDes nets, PCIe Gen 3, Gen 4, DDR3, DDR4, DDR5 routing. All these things require domain experts, and they can cause design review bottlenecks and increased chance of respins of the board. So we need to identify these issues and correct them. The first way we're going to do that today is with a tool from Mentor called Expedition Validate, where it's a fully automated, proven schematic integrity tool that's designed to replace visual inspection of your schematics. So it's got 150 plus built-in automatic checks. It's got a library of 6 million plus parts. It'll catch most parametric errors in your design. It'll save your hardware engineers hundreds of hours of visual inspection and lab debug time. The greatest things about these three tools we're going to talk about today in this session is that they work and interoperate within all major EDA tools. So Expedition Validate will check any schematic regardless of which schematic authoring tool that you're using. Some examples of the 150 plus built-in checks that we're going to talk about today are full multi-board and backplane interface verification, pin function compatibility tests, pin voltage checks. If you have a twisted diff pair and let's say it was connected wrong on the board, Validate will find that. Offboard nets detection. These are just some of the many checks. And we found that with the case study of 100 customer designs, that Validate actually saved 69 respins of these designs and had a direct savings per project of around $51,000. So the tool essentially will pay for itself by saving you from one prototype respin. Now we said that Validate works in any schematic flow, but this is Mentor Graphics Expedition Designer. So this is our schematic authoring tool. And we'll highlight during the demo today of Validate the benefits of being on a Mentor flow. But like we said, it'll work in any flow. So with this schematic and this project, we have Expedition Validate, and we're actually running it on a multi-board system. So we have a main motherboard called the test tray. This is from our partner Syntex through the Hyperlynx Alliance. And then there's another board, a daughter card called the DBMC, which has DDR4 on it and PCIe Gen 3. So we have high-speed boards and part of a multi-board project. We've imported the bill of materials and netlist. The bill of materials was imported from a spreadsheet. And now we're going to click on the next tab and look at our component models. So like we said, there's a 6 million plus model part library. And if we edit the models, you can see the ones that are assigned contain all the parametric information, like the voltage and the input, output voltages, all the stuff that's in the datasheet for each component is all included here. And make sure those are assigned correctly so we can get accurate results in our simulation. And then we're going to look at the voltages tab, which is where we can scan automatically for voltages or import them from a spreadsheet. And here we've actually assigned all our voltages. This is the second part of making sure we have an accurate simulation. We need the component models and the voltages to be set up properly. On the Run Manager tab, we'll select a subset of tests to perform. These are some of the 150 plus built-in checks that we talked about earlier. And so we're going to select only a few of these for this demo. Not run all of them. You can run all of them out of the box. You can choose, just for the sake of time, we're going to run a few of them. And then we'll run our data confirmation. This will give us any warnings about component models that are assigned. It'll say, hey, make sure your voltages are assigned properly because we want to make sure we have accurate results. And then it's as simple as clicking Run Schematic Integrity Analysis. So once again, it's just push button. It's automated. It's going to remove the need for the manual inspection of every net in the design and every schematic page in the design. And you can save your results to a spreadsheet as well. We're going to actually run an intelligent results processing to organize our results, give us the ability to mask or hide any results that we want to mask. In the top right, you can see we've got 15 criticals, some defects, some warnings. And we can sort by column here. So I've organized it so the critical ones are up front. The critical errors are where the respins are going to happen. And we said validate worked in any flow, and you can export these results via a PDF report or a CSV file. So if you want to share these results, you can with anybody at your site. But by being on a mentor flow, we can click on these violations and it'll actually show us the specific schematic page in the design where the problem is. So in this case, we clicked on a violation, we had a missing connection, and we have the ability to make that wire connection immediately because in the mentor flow, it's all fully integrated. Similar to using Expedition Validate to automatically check schematics, we're going to now shift over to the next stage of the PCB design process and talk about automating checks for PCB layout. So with the tool that we're going to use for that is Hyperlynx DRC, and it has built-in design rule checks that automate design manual checking for layout. So once again, it reduces the manual design time from a few hours to minutes because these checks run very quickly. It's got SI checks, power integrity checks, and EMI checks built in, and high voltage safety checks as well that we're going to talk about today. Hyperlynx DRC also has its own script writing and debugging environment, so you can write your own custom checks and include that into the tool. So whatever your PCB review process is, Hyperlynx DRC can automate it. And a lot of the stuff out of the box will cover the checks you run today that are manual checks. Right now, there's 40 plus built-in DRCs with editable parameters, so you can take your datasheet or app note, whatever it is that you're trying to verify, and put those values in, and it'll automatically check it for you. Some examples are high-speed traces crossing gaps, where a high-speed signal will see an impedance change on that gap in the power planes. It'll cause a reflection of that signal. So that's something where you'd manually need to check high-speed nets in the design, layer by layer, net by net. Decoupling capacitor placement, saying if the voltage on the capacitor is the proper voltage to decouple the IC power pin and if it's close enough within the proper distance. Return path changes for signals, crosstalk checks, impedance checks, differential pair phase matching, all the things that are hard to check for manually. Another thing that's very tedious to check for is high voltage safety, where high voltage energy will creep from a high voltage object along the surface of the PCB and affect other objects on the board. So we call this the creepage distance. It's like the minimum distance that objects should be spaced apart to not get that high voltage safety issue. And the way that customers and designers check for this today are they use IEC standards to validate the minimum creepage distance for their prototype board. There's different standards for power electronic equipment or medical equipment or IT equipment or electrical cables. So what we've done is we've actually automated this process and embedded these IEC standards into our Hyperlynx DRCs. And we're going to show that in our demo today. So this is a problem that's very tedious on the order of it takes days of engineering time to check for. It's a very simple process in that it's easy to calculate for. It's a simple formula. If depending on the material of the object and the pollution degree of your environment, there's a minimum distance that you have to know. But to check for this manually takes days of time because there's thousands of nets or thousands of objects on the board that are susceptible to the high voltage radiation. So here we're actually going to use Hyperlynx DRC to do a same layer check. It's just a simple creepage check. On the right in dark khaki, we've got a 200 volt power net, and you can see the minimum distance that it's affecting that 1.5 volt net that's nearby is it's too close. So we're getting it flagged in red and it's saying, okay, here's the creepage distance, and it calculates it for you automatically. That's just a simple same layer check, but the real benefit of these rules are to use the 3D creepage engine to check multiple layers on the board, top side of the board, bottom side of the board, and to check for the surrounding floating metal with the built-in IEC standards embedded. So in this check, we have that lime green victim net that's farther away, and it actually is, very far from that 200 volt aggressor net. It's so far that the creepage distance, should be fine. But the surrounding metal around that board, the dark green nets, are an extension of that victim. So in actuality, the creepage distance is very, very small, on the order of 1 millimeter instead of 50 or 500 mils. So we're looking at, something that you'd have to check for manually and is very, very hard to spot sometimes. Creepage distance is different than clearance distance because it mines an air gap. So because it creeps along the surface of the board, if there's a slot or a hole in the board, like in this example, the creepage distance has to walk around that. So Hyperlynx DRC can read all these holes in the board and can analyze them automatically for you when it might be a little trickier to know the actual full distance there. Now, Hyperlynx DRC, just like Validate, works on any layout. So you can work in Cadence or Zukin or Altium or any ODB++ data. But the benefit of using a mentor flow is that it's integrated into our layout tool, Expedition Layout. So here we're using Expedition to run the checks again in their environment in the Expedition Layout GUI. So you're not learning anything new. You're using the Hazard Explorer to report the violations. And in this case, we have a high voltage 100-volt net aggressor on top side of the board. And you can see it's going through that slot in the board to the bottom side of the board and affecting an object on the bottom. So it's very tedious to check this way for the creepage as well in the high voltage. Another example is the board edge. So we have that khaki 100-volt trace on the top side of the board. And we can see that it's actually creeping around the edge of the board and affecting a net on the bottom side of the board. So creepage and clearance are very easy to understand issues. There's a high voltage issue, it's creeping to other nets and affecting and radiating to other objects on the board. But to check for this manually is very, very, very tedious. So Hyperlynx DRC automates that for our users. And since we're in the Expedition layout environment, we have the ability to make and move these nets automatically because we're already there in the environment for layout. The last thing we're going to talk about today is design for manufacturing with Valor MPI. So the same idea, we're going to do manufacturing checks on the PCB design, and it'll work on any layout tool that you currently use. Valor MPI will generate the manufacturing tooling and the programs and documentation you'll need for fabrication. It'll optimize the PCB for volume production. So if you have a product or a new product introduction, and then you're going to mass produce it, it'll give you that peace of mind that you're ready for manufacturing. And Valor MPI is an industry standard actually that has a lot of built-in checks. So some of these checks we're going to look at today are insufficient heel distance with weak solder joints, actual component body covers for mounting holes, silver masking and exposed copper, flex conductor shapes and flex bend areas. All the manufacturing tolerances that are built in to your PCB today will be taken care of. So like we said before, Valor MPI is actually an industry standard, so it's been around a while and has over 35 million manufacturing part numbers, and it'll enable the virtual prototype build of your PCB, and it's the only way to assure all of these manufacturing checks are going to be validated before you go to your manufacturing process. It'll identify issues that can't be found using the CAD libraries. This is the Analysis Definition Manager from Valor, and this is where you're going to put all the constraints in for etch material or mechanical, the solder, the quality. This will be the ground copper spacing, the via to via spacing requirements, all the manufacturing tolerances that are for your particular product are going to be placed in here. And this is where we set and define all of that manufacturing information. That way we can check accurately against your own product. Like we said before, Valor will work in any flow. But the major benefit of using Valor on a mentor flow is that it's integrated with Expedition. So here we're using the same stack-up editor that's in Hyperlynx, that's in Expedition layout, and we're directly using those values, the technology information, the thickness of each layer, all of the constraints that are defined in Expedition layout are being read dynamically. So if you make any changes, Valor will know right away, and it'll update its automatic checks with those changes in mind. Similar to Hyperlynx DRC, there on the right side, there's a client button where we can run the Valor DFM. So we'll run that, and then on the bottom right, it'll say it's ready. Similar to Hyperlynx DRC, the Expedition GUIs report violations in the Hazard Explorer. So there's now a Valor DFM tab in the Hazard Explorer, and we'll click on violations, and Expedition will automatically snap to and show you the layer and the area where the violation occurs. So for this first check, we're going to look at some copper slivers. We'll click on the last violation, and we'll see a part where a net inadvertently caused a copper sliver. So we're just going to move that net over. This is the beauty of being on the Mentor flow, is that we're in the layout, so when we find a manufacturing issue, we don't have to send the information back to the layout engineer and make the changes. We can make those changes immediately because we're already in the design flow. In this issue, we've got some solder mask that's exposed here, so we're going to remove it. And then the last check we're going to look at is an undrilled area. So we'll click on that violation and we'll see where a manufacturing hole should be, a mounting hole, and it hasn't been drilled. So we need to make some design decisions here to move that around or change it. Just as a final summary for all three of these tools, Expedition Validate will automatically check schematics, Hyperlynx DRC automatically will verify and simulate layouts, and Valor NPI will validate manufacturing for your PCB prototypes. All of these can work in any flow, but if you use the Mentor flow, they're fully integrated and really speed up that time to manufacturing process because you're not sending information back and forth. You're working all in one direct flow from full PCB inception, schematic to layout to manufacturing. Thanks. This has been a session on validating and automating design compliance. This is one of 3 sessions held at the 2019 Design Con for Mentor Graphics.